and welcome to Island Connections. I'm Ibrahim Aoude. UARC Reloaded. Recently, President McLean has recommended that the UARC University Affiliated Research Center, which is a Navy initiative, will be for the entire university system instead of the University of Hawaii, Mānoa only. And before that, Denise Conan, the interim chancellor for the Mānoa campus, recommended against UH Mānoa have a UARC within the University of Mānoa campus. However, this UARC has, since its inception as an idea and then development of it in terms of trying to push it on the university, had met with stiff opposition and overwhelming opposition, in fact, from faculty, students, and staff. And despite the recommendation of Denise Conan, the interim chancellor for the Mānoa campus, President McLean elected to do it for the system as a whole as a recommendation for the Board of Regents. And this, in fact, is really a travesty because it obviates the will of the majority, overwhelming majority of the campus community, and in fact the community in Hawaii. So we will be discussing the UARC and what needs to be done in terms of opposing it and trying to defeat this monster situation in terms of UARC being within the confines of the University of Hawaii, even if it were to be physically outside the university, but it will be part of the university system. And with us to discuss this is Professor Miriam Sharma from Asian Studies, and she's also with Save UH and Stop UARC. And Ikaika Hussey, who's a graduate student for political science at the University of Hawaii, and he's also from DMZ Hawaii / Aloha Aina. And Professor Beverly Keever, she's from journalism at the UH. Welcome all, and thank you very much for coming. Thank you. So when we say this kind of travesty, well, you know, how do you feel about this situation of the recommendation of President McLean to the Board of Regents of having this UARC as a project for the University of Hawaii? You know, any of you?
Go ahead. Well, I just begin with my 2 cents. It is a travesty indeed, and it's not only a travesty, it's kind of a real abuse of language, because one of the things that McLean said is, even though he acknowledged overwhelmingly, you know, that the faculty senate and other constituencies voted against or expressed opinion against the UARC, he said, I cannot give in to the voice of the majority. I have to listen to the voice of the minority, because that's what democracy is about. So I think that's a rather strange idea, Alice in Wonderland idea of what democracy is. So that's my initial take on it.
Yeah, Ikaika, would you like to elaborate on this or your ideas about it?
Sure. I first of all, I don't think anyone who's been watching this issue closely is actually surprised by the decision of Mr. McLean, because from the very beginning, we've been dealing with a situation where, you know, we have a Board of Regents which is not it's not really responsible to the community, it's not responsible to the faculty or the students, or accountable to the faculty or the students. It's a corporate board composed primarily of people from the business community, political appointees of the governor. You know, McLean himself, you know, is he plays the role of sort of being the politician for the University of Hawaii, instead of being an administrator, which is really what we need for the university system. And so, given the kind of politics that the university is part of, and the politics that filters down into it, it's not surprising, given the way in which militarism as a whole, the question of military in Hawaii always gets washed over. It's very rare for the dailies, it's very rare for the folks who really run Hawaii to question the role of the military in Hawaii. And what we've seen is that as Mimi said, you have the faculty, through the Faculty Senate, you have ASUH, the student government, you have the student caucus, which is the student governments throughout the 10 campuses of Hawaii, all coming out saying they don't want UARC. You have the Native Hawaiian community through the Kuli'i Council, through the Puko'a Council, all of which are official advisory bodies to the UH administration, all saying no to UARC. But in the last few weeks, something interesting has happened. You have a couple of defense contractors coming out in favor of UARC. You have the publisher for the Honolulu Advertiser petitioning for UARC to go through. And so you see a situation where the people are saying no, but the folks who are at the top of the pyramid in Hawaii, they're the ones who are pulling the strings here.
Yeah, in fact, I've been reading stuff about UARC in, say, the Advertiser, and who is featured there, I mean, in terms of like columns and stuff. Fujio Matsuda is one, other people who are all for the UARC. I haven't seen anything that's against the UARC, except like letters to the editor, etc., unless I missed something. But also the Advertiser editorial was for the UARC, and it's not strange to me that they would go for that position. Yeah, but it tells you, it's like corroborates what you have been saying, that the whole thing is corporation run, whether it's the Board of Regents or the decision makers in Hawaii, whether well, in the public sector as well. So would you like to comment more on that, Bev, since I know you are interested in those kinds of issues?
I am interested in journalism. Of course, we can sort of smell spin when we see it coming out, and I think there was a lot of spin in his announcement. He tried to portray this as agreeing with the Chancellor from Mānoa, and yet all of the work is still going to be done here. I'm not sure that people understand the UARC here was going to be quite different than any of the other UARCs in the country, in that it's going to be mixed in with the laboratories and the classrooms right here on campus. And this is a campus that is already lacking in space. Yeah. But the other point that I want to mention is we're interested in the free flow of information. I mean, that's what universities are all about, and that's definitely what we want to do in our research, have debate, discussion. He said that we're not going to have classified research in this UARC for 3 years, but he failed to mention that the unclassified research will also be completely censored. In other words, the UARC will be self-contained. There'll be kind of like a little firewall around it, and no information developed there can be related to anyone outside the UARC without the Navy's permission. That means you send it to Washington, and that permission is if it's sensitive and appropriate for public disclosure. We're not talking about top secret or anything. It's just whether or not they want to have that disclosed. Mm-hmm. So without having access to what that research is doing, if it's great research, the world isn't going to know about it. And if it's really bad research, it's not going to have the benefit of critiquing and peer review and so on.
Good. So before we proceed,
could I add one?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Sure.
Just sorry.
No, that's
okay.
fine.
Well, just
sorry.
one thing about the news media, because it was so obvious up until the time that McLean recommended to the BOR that the UARC go forward. There was very little heard on promoting arguments aside from money. Mm-hmm. There was very little promoting the UARC. And there was testimony and letters and articles all written against. And the minute, it's like the termites came out of the woodwork. The minute the UARC was approved, then all they said was, great, we need it. Wonderful job, wonderful job. He did the right thing. But there was absolutely no substance, no argument before or after other than he did the right thing, which shows how flimsy the rationale is. Right. So I just wanted to add that.
That's good. But before we proceed, I'd like to play a segment interview. Actually, Ruth Dawson was a guest on the show, and Ruth Dawson is professor of women's studies at the University of Hawaii. So we had some kind of discussion on a previous show on that. We play that and then we can discuss it. Okay, that's the first incarnation of UARC. Okay.
University is, and whether this other activity actually can be made to mesh with the mission of the university. And I think there's some big questions about that in a number of different ways. The university would be asked in the UARC not just possibly to do classified research, as Mike Hamnett kind of indicated, but definitely to do classified research. In fact, when this was first presented to the Faculty Senate, of which I'm a member, one of the early questions was, could we accept the UARC but say we won't do the classified research component?
Yeah. Just to say, a university-affiliated research center, that's the UARC.
Yes, yes, yes.
And also like Gary Ostrander, who's the Vice Chancellor for Research.
Yes.
He said something about he expects about 15% of what UARC might be handling would be classified research.
That's right.
But that's a significant chunk of the UARC.
Well, mostly, it is definitely a significant chunk, and especially we asked, could we have this agency on our campus, but say no classified research, and the answer was no. The acceptance of classified research as part of the UARC is presented to us as a fundamental requirement, which tells you that it's a very important part.
Yeah. There's also Ronald Sega, who's director of research, military research.
Right, director of Defense Research and Engineering.
Yeah, he has an interesting quote. I don't know if you would like to.
Oh, I have the memo here.
Yeah, to give you an idea about what you were saying, to just back up what you were saying. Yeah.
Well, it's a very interesting memo. It's from July of 2004, and it's a memo in which he's talking about making the University of Hawaii at Mānoa into a UARC. And he summarizes by saying, I look forward to seeing this intriguing basic and applied ocean science and astronomical technology. I look forward to seeing all of that improve the system performance of DoD weapon systems. So one of the concerns definitely is about the role of the university in the production and improvement of weapon systems. Is that something that we should do, that we need to do, that it's right for us to do? Does it match our mission? I'm not saying that nobody should do that.
I mean, why I wanted to show this, to show how the debate was before the recommendation of Denise Conan, just squelching it. And then the stiff opposition, as I mentioned earlier, from faculty and students and staff and community. And despite all this, this is what happened. So this is like, this second reincarnation, of this UARC. As so the will of the majority doesn't matter because we have to submit to the minority. But one might think like this minority is like 30% of the university community. But actually it's only a few people, and then they can still do research somewhere else, military research or whatever it is, without like burdening the university and like really going in terms of burdening the university community with this kind of UARC. They can do it somewhere else. I don't know where they might do it. On the continental U.S. Would be best, But anyway,
that's a good point. In his statement, President McLean said, at the most, there would be about 36 people who would really be doing the UARC research.
Right.
Well, I don't know if many people realize that under the union contract, professors 1 day a week can do their outside consulting as long as it's off campus. So they can do all sorts of research for the Navy in that off-duty time when they're not using our facilities and not using, all of the equipment.
Yeah,
and so those people, if they're so valuable, can still work for the Navy when they're not on duty.
And there is military research that professors are engaged in now. I mean, and some of those researchers for the military came out against the UARC. I mean, they spoke fervently against the UARC. And so one would wonder why this hullabaloo is all about.
Yeah. Also have to realize, too, that even if research is conducted off campus, that means that it's not within, you know, the boundaries of Dole Street and University Avenue, but it's located in our community. Sure. And we have an entire history of secret military research in our community. We have sarin gas testing in Puna in the 1960s. You have chemical weapons dumping offshore of Waianae. You have depleted uranium in Schofield. Agent Orange, which was a University of Hawai'i project, tested on Kauai, which led to...
chemical spill today on Kaka'ako, chemical spill.
Really?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. I saw that on the television this morning.
So, I mean, there you go. I mean, this is just to, you know, corroborate what you're saying. I want to, I mean, discuss something that just came to mind, and in fact, from what the discussion was just before we started the show. In terms of like poor McLean, he, you know, he's not the one to be blamed for it. So for that, I want to show on the Elmo something that might, like, you know, deal with the situation, whether it was, you know, he's like, you know, the scapegoat, or is he the one that really started this reincarnation of UARC? There you go. So this is, do you want to say something about that?
Well, I think that sometimes the cartoonists simplify things, but hit the nail right there on the head. So you can see the old trite cartoon usually, but in this case they're saying, I speak no evil, see no evil, and then McLean, hear no evil.
No, hear nobody.
Hear nobody.
No, nobody.
He's also the third monkey.
Yeah, well, the third monkey.
Anyway, so that I wanted to show that, because without his recommendation, the Board of Regents wouldn't have had you know, a leg to stand on, because then they would have to come against the will of the overwhelming majority of the community at the university, at least, and the Denise Conan's recommendation, and then McLean's recommendation against, you know. But in this case, McLean said yes, with all this kind of spin that he put on it. So I think it's good for us to be talking about those kinds of issues and McLean's role on that. And then also the Board of Regents, and what are they up to, and what can be done to try and, you know, tell them that you cannot do that, you know, despite the fact that they are, you know, representatives of corporations and so on. But at least, you know, they have to have some kind of sense that you cannot just run a university in this manner, which in fact brings a question that was asked before, and a book was written on it. Who runs the university? So, I mean, who runs the university? The majority that really goes to class every day to teach or to learn, or, you know, or what? You know, who does really?
Well, one of the ironies is that the Board of Regents are all political appointments, and I guess the majority of them are fairly recent or legal appointments. And they're supposed to just kind of oversee the management of the university, not to micromanage and to, you know, institute their own programs and ideas. And one of the questions, I guess, people can think about or discuss is, what is the relationship between McLean and the Board of Regents? And getting to, is it really his idea that he's recommending to them, or somehow has he been involved in what negotiations, secret negotiations that have already involved the Board of Regents, and they've kind of passed top down their decision to him. So it's a question, really, who's making the decisions and who is running the university. Right.
So, I mean,
well, there's the relationship between the president and the board, but there's also the relationship between the board and the general community, the general economy, and the, you know, the political structure of Hawaii. And, you know, all a person really has to do is look at who the Board of Regents are. viewer tonight could go to Hawaii.edu, www.hawaii.edu. There's links that they can follow under UH system, I believe, and there's biographies for all of the sitting members of the Board of Regents. Mm-hmm. One of them, the chair, is Kitty Lagaretta. Mm-hmm. And I remember when Kitty was, when Regent Lagaretta was strongly involved in Governor Lingle's campaign for governor. And if you go to Ms. Lagaretta's webpage for her company, Compact or Communication Specific, one of the things they talk about on that webpage is that their role is to bring the community along on controversial issues. Mm-hmm. And if you look at who their clients are, it's the big business folks, it's the developers, it's the hotel industry. Right now, they appear to be working for the military's interests. Yeah. It's impossible to suggest, or at least there isn't enough information at this point to suggest that there's a bright line relationship. But just looking at the way in which UARC has been shepherded along, the way in which the university has been led to believe that this is an appropriate thing, and that the way the community has been convinced, it's an indication that what we're seeing is really a PR strategy. We're seeing a communication strategy, something that a corporation would use, not something that a university, a public university, should be using.
But if Compact's, message is, or actually raison d'etre is to bring the community along, they must have failed, because they are dragging them along and they are screaming, So that's it's a bad thing,
Right. It's about dotting the I's and crossing the T's, and presenting, a facade at least of a democratic process.
But in this case, they must have done the opposite, like dotted the T's and crossed the I's.
See,
I'm talking about.
That's one of the things that I think we should all appreciate about grassroots politics, is that there's folks with money, and then there's the people. Mm-hmm. And you might have the money, but you don't necessarily have the people. Mm-hmm. And the people are on one side of this issue. The people are on the side saying no to UARC, saying stop UARC. But the folks with the money are saying, well, let's find a way to implement this.
Right. Yeah. And the other issue it raises, it just makes me think on a larger issue, globalization. Kind of, you have the multinationals, the people who serve to benefit from the situation, and then you have ordinary people, like people at the WTO meetings, who protested. So there's a whole question of interest, and when people who have interests in a certain matter are also making decisions, we call that a conflict of interest. So the question is, what are the interests of the people who are on the BOR? I notice another CEO of the Citibank and chairman, Ronald Magita, is Air Force civilian on the Air Force Civilian Advisory Council. One Board of Regents member recused himself. We don't know why. You can do that without explaining. So the question is also, to what extent are there conflicts of interest that we don't even know about, possible future military contracts or UARC contracts?
Actually,
so we don't know that.
Really, an enigma, really. I mean, what's really going on with UARC, and why did they do it? Beyond even this, there's certain things that we still don't know, but it still raises a larger question, and I put it in terms of who runs the university. But actually, it raises this question beyond UARC also, because look what happened directly after the recommendation. They rammed the Board of Regents, in their infinite wisdom, they rammed this selection of McLean to become president without any normal procedure that the university has been used to. So again here, if it's UARC and then this thing, then what's next, And we can talk about all kinds of other things like tuition increases and this and that and the other, despite protestations of a lot of people and so on. So that is really disturbing and troubling in many ways. Any more on that situation, UARC, or the way the university is run?
Just to kind of bring home your point about the dissent, you might mention that Mimi and I were among 8 professors that presented the Board of Regents with an official complaint to say they are violating their own policies, which is that the president is behooved to follow the will of the faculty in terms of modes of research, unless he gives a very exceptional justification, which he has not done. And so we're asking for them to look at their own policies in terms of the violation of the president. Also, they violated the university policy about sexual orientation and discrimination of those kinds of people, because you will be working for the Navy, and they discriminate against that kind of employee of any type. So that's one point that I think is significant, that there is an official complaint that the board has looking at the UARC decision making, even though it may violate their own policy, and in some cases even state law.
Yeah. I want to show a couple of things on the Elmo, just to, show that in fact, and all these are editorials, from Kaleo, these cartoons. So this one is rather interesting. Look what the fish is doing,
See, they're very much afraid that the Navy is using a lot of sonar technology,
right,
and that this is having repercussions about the whales.
Yeah.
I think it captures it very nicely from the standpoint of the whales.
Right, and then this other one, McLean recommends UARC despite massive opposition. So it is like USS Mānoa. But actually USS UH system now, apparently, even though the professors who would be doing the research are 36 of them, did you mention? Did you say are from Mānoa?
Maximum.
Yeah.
Maximum.
Yeah, so there you go, the maximum, that one.
And then what he is saying is, I'm king of the world.
Yeah, so,
I'm king of the world.
I mean, this is very disturbing,
very
it seems to me.
glorification.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's also disturbing. I mean, Bev raised, and maybe Ikaika too, the whole idea of media and spin. And it seems that language is being reinvented, and events are kind of being reincarnated in different ways, but they're still the very same thing. I was struck by, well, there have been several pronouncements by McLean, but I think he gave a recent speech. It was in the university newsletter or something. And 2 things struck me is he said all the things now that I'm the president, or the king, whatever he said, what I'll do for the university. And one of the things he said is, I want to make sure that democratic procedures and that there's an attention to democracy at the university. And then just about at the end, I don't know if either of you read that, he said, and I have to make sure that we increase Native Hawaiian students and attend to their interests and their needs on campus. And I just thought, how could you really say that?
When you did that
You did the undemocratic thing, and then you did something that violated the will and every aspect of showing a concern for indigenous people.
This whole notion of Hawaiian sense of place, for instance.
Exactly. However, I think that absolutely it's really quite funny, but it's what should be expected, right? Because now that the president has adopted a course of action directly contravening the will of Kuali'i Council and the Puko'a Council, I wouldn't be surprised if we see the administration increasing tuition waivers for Native Hawaiians, or trying to arrive at a kind of settlement on the GMO kalo, or the patenting of kalo issue. They want to maintain, they want to keep protests down. They want to maintain a kind of quiet, so that they can keep on doing things as they please.
Yeah, there may be. I mean, that's a time-honored tactic, co-optation in various ways, and that's why indigenous peoples have been subject to that co-optation around the world a lot. I mean, I know that I'm indigenous from another place, but I'm indigenous. Yeah, I know that. Yeah,
Council
sure.
or something like that to be formed.
That's right.
Those kinds of things will happen.
So I want to take this opportunity actually to say to the viewers that we welcome your comments and questions on Oahu 956-5670, Neighbor Islands, 1-800-342-7949. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks. So, any ideas about other things that you want to bring up before?
Well, I think to answer your question about who runs the university, I think it shows that there's a very strong business interest in that is pushing this under the very false premise that this is actually going to help economic development. Right. Because I don't think people understand that the difference between some of the military research that is being done now and the UARC research is the researchers have access to sensitive, privileged, and classified information. And they are obliged to protect that. So all of the work that they do and all the research they do is kind of self-contained in a firewall. And they are not permitted to share that with anyone unless the Navy censors permit them to. That means that any of the spin-offs for the small business or the diversification of the economy and so on that they keep saying is going to happen is technically unable to comply with what the whole UARC is about.
Right. So, yeah.
And it trumps all the other research on campus.
Good.
That's what they're worried about, is it will take precedent over anything else, and in fact, there are fines and penalties if they don't deliver on schedule.
Yeah,
there's another aspect of it in terms of the economic argument. If you look at the companies which have been coming out promoting UARC, companies like Orancon, Novasol, Boeing, okay, these are companies whose prime client is the federal government, okay, and all of us in Hawaii are very familiar with federal dependency, on the federal budget. You know, I've seen quotes that talk about Senator Inoue as being the second largest economy in Hawaii. You know, and so this is an example of the kind of federal dependency which we need to find alternatives to. We need to diversify ourselves out of that notion of economics, and the fact that UARC is being propped up by Enterprise Honolulu, the Chamber of Commerce, as being a model of economic development, or at least a tool for economic development, shows the way in which their model for diversification is really just the old model. It's dependency on federal monies, and not diversifying and not finding ways for us to, take care of ourselves.
Yeah, like military spending, if not fickle, it's unsteady. Because you cannot trust it because they can take it away anytime or whatever. So that's Mimi.
Well, I just would like to piggyback on Ikaika's, talking about also not only business and what both of them mentioned, but look at the military. I mean, because that's what UARC is. It's weapons systems development, however you want to sugarcoat it. Talking about breast cancer and diabetes research. Maybe that's what other military money is doing, but that's certainly not what the UARC is intended to do. And I just, I had come across this online, but here I see it's in Ed Case has written this article about, anyway, it relates to the quadrennial defense budget and talks about Hawaii's growing role in the nation's defense. And basically, we are becoming the center of all of the military kind of headquarters that now sees important threats as coming not from Europe, but coming from Asia. And of course, the major threat is China, gearing up against China. And I think one of the things we have to think about is what that means for our own life and our own security, whether more and more becoming involved in being the nation's headquarters, getting over $5 billion of our Hawaii state budget as compared to about $11 billion from from tourism, whether this is really a very healthy way to live both economically and socially.
Because it has to do with infrastructure, more infrastructure. How about having another 50,000 troops and their dependents here in Hawaii? What would that do to housing, other infrastructure, and all that,
Not to
schools,
mention
traffic. Well, forget about traffic. I know about traffic. I get in it every day.
Plus, there's the tremendous danger of living between two empires.
Right.
And we have an intimate experience with that in World War II, with Pearl Harbor, which was a conflict which happened on Hawaii's soil between the Japanese Empire and the U.S. Empire. The United States doesn't like to think of itself as the empire, but
it's getting to be proud of it.
It depends on who you're talking to. But it becomes very dangerous because it means that we become a pawn in those,
absolutely,
in this kind of historic conflicts.
And the Pacific has a miserable history of that. I mean,
right. All the way through the Pacific.
Tinian and Belau and the rest of it, all these places, Okinawa, Marshall Islands, Yeah, you wrote a book on this, Yeah, sorry.
No, I was going to say independency on military as a form of our economic lifeline is really unhealthy. I mean, it's like a drug dependency, and very hard to, as we can see with the way the UARC is being pushed, and our senators and our congressmen are pushing more and more military should be here. It's great for the economy. It becomes a drug, a dependency that once you're into is very hard to break out of.
To, just to play the devil's advocate a little bit, I mean, they say, no, this is like not military, this is high technology, and we want to diversify into high technology. But, so what would you say to that?
Well, I'm not a scientist, but there has been several scientists, physicists, and others who say that if you want to diversify into high technology and be innovative and really come up with great technological innovations, you don't do task-ordered research. You have a free and open flow of, give and take of ideas and discovery. That's how discovery goes about. It doesn't go, you tell me, discover something, and then I do it.
I saw it. But the other thing is that because we mentioned that because all this kind of stuff is favors the big corporations like Boeing and those big guys. So it is money out from Hawaii because Boeing is not in Hawaii, So the other guys who might be trying to do some venture capital here and small concerns that trying to have like ideas about high tech, we're not talking about these guys because, as you mentioned before, it is counter to those kinds of interests. And in fact, in terms of diversification of the economy, etc., it works against it too. Yeah?
In fact, there's a subcontracting plan which goes together with this UARC proposal in which the subcontracting plan says that money should go to women-owned businesses, to veteran-owned businesses, to minority-owned businesses, and then at the end of the list there's large businesses. Now, according to the subcontracting plan, 10% of the money that's available for subcontracts will go to those businesses, the minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, etc. 90% of the money goes to large businesses. And we've been trying to get information about exactly what companies that is. What do they mean by a large business? Is it the Boeings?
People, but it's like,
is it the Boeings of the world? Is it the Lockheed Martins? Right. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, that's a good question that needs like more research.
Right? It's a flow through.
Yeah, right. I want to have this segment. I interviewed Tai Tengan before, and he's a professor at University of Hawai'i, Ethnic Studies and Anthropology. So we play that segment. It's a couple of minutes and gives you a perspective, indigenous perspective as well, although, you have this indigenous perspective also, but another one also.
It's one of the worst things that could be happening at this point in time is the increased militarization of the university, which is related to the increased militarization that's going on around Hawaii and these islands. And it kind of is part of this larger colonial legacy of occupation in these islands. Begun with the landing of the Marines in 1893 to support the illegal overthrow there, part of the larger kind of project of imperialism in 1898 when the U.S. illegally annexed Hawaii, and then the subsequent buildup of military bases here during that territorial period, and then after, you know, statehood. And it's that military presence specifically which has enabled all of these acts to take place, and the majority of the lands which they use are Hawaiian lands, the ceded lands, which were the Mānoaʻs lands, as well as the government lands, which were meant, again, for the public use. All of these taken by the U.S. government, and then much of which were specifically used for military purposes. Part of the process of militarization is not only the physical occupation of lands, but also that occupation of people's minds, and getting them to think in a particular way about the military, that it is a good thing, that it is something that we need, it's something that we want. And this is established through cultural institutions and educational institutions. And the university is meant to be a place where you have this freedom of speech, this ability to think freely and to critique those larger structures which work to actively colonize people's minds. And once this UARC is established, there will be some very severe consequences and compromises that will be made, and it will be that much harder to be able to carry on this free discourse of thoughts, of knowledge.
Well, you know, I was thinking as Taitenga was talking about if, according to Denise Conan, in terms of cost-benefit analysis, and that's what she did because she's an economist, if that cost-benefit analysis is not good for Mānoa, how in the world is it going to be good for the entire U.S. system? I still haven't figured that one out. You know. So any comments on that, or what Tai was talking about?
Well, just briefly what Tai was talking about, you know, colonizing people's minds. I think it's many of our minds that are colonized by the education system, but also that the whole idea of the UARC, as Bev said right at the beginning, even if for 3 years we don't do classified research, if that in fact is feasible, still all the research will be under wraps, will still have some secrecy around it, will not be easily open to the public. And, you know, I was just looking at different universities and the whole idea of academic freedom and dissemination of knowledge. For example, at the University of California, their academic senate passed a resolution saying that our fundamental mission is to discover knowledge and to disseminate it to the students and to society at large. Principles of academic freedom guarantee freedom of inquiry, research, teaching, and freedom of expression and publication. So we come down again to the micro level. Is UARC good for UH? What can it do for UH?
For the system.
Well, it's for the system now. But the point is that because academic freedom has been one of the ideas that have been, again, bandied about, and I think the ideas have been misused to support the UARC, but the whole idea is open and free discovery and dissemination of ideas that benefit the community at large. So one wonders where all of the UARC research fits in that.
Right.
But just to build up on what you said, there was a special faculty report out of MIT that said, if you want to help national security and national defense, you need this vigorous debate, this peer review to make sure you get good research. In other words, the U.S. military strength is based on our technological and our scientific advancements, which have come up through this free flow of information, critiquing each other, debating, building on everyone's theories, and so on. If you close all of that off, you run the risk of even having fraudulent research, as they also happened at MIT.
Just like caution here, because some would say that within the intelligence community or within that kind of community, doing research for the military, for instance, or the federal government, they have all kinds of publications and they do all these things, but still this is confined to a particular place. Even there are like a number of these kinds of journals where they can have like these kinds of research there, but it's still secret and doesn't involve the entire community as a whole. I mean, the entire research community as a whole. So still, it's important to mention that, but say that still would be kind of shortcomings to that, yes. We have someone, Alva from Nanakuli. You're on the air, Alva.
Hi, I just have two questions. I was wondering if UARC is at the military universities like West Point, Annapolis, and all U.S. Coast Guard. And my other question was, did I understand that correctly? That they developed the Agent Orange at the University of Hawai'i?
Do you want to answer?
Actually, I think Bev should answer the question about Agent Orange.
I'll go off now so I can hear.
Okay.
Well, yes, as a matter of fact, no, Agent Orange was not developed at UH, but in the 60s, about 1967, UH was contracted by the U.S. Army to test it. They tested it at Kauai, on the Kauai experimental station there, and they had Agent Orange and Agent Purple and all different kinds of mixtures, but it all contained dioxin, which we know is one of the most deadly ingredients known to man. And my students and I went over there and we interviewed some of the people that worked on that. And one of the ag workers, who was a UH employee, he said, well, we stood there with our flags to guide the planes as they came swooping in to spray this. And we got so drenched every day we didn't even bother to wash our uniforms or anything. Well, the three people that did that have all died of cancers, of many, many different kinds of diseases. And the really horrifying thing was, when they finished the experiments, they buried the residue in drums above a reservoir on a hillside. So that still contaminated Kauai for decades. And not until we broke the story did they ever even try to move it. So it has a very bad effect. Actually, we went over there to interview one of the veterans from Vietnam who had also suffered from it and said it contaminated his children. And since then, of course, there have been major court cases in which millions of Vietnamese have claimed to have been injured. I mean, some of the pictures of the newborn are really terrifying. So this was an example, I think, of the military research that, unbeknownst, I'm sure, when the university approved it, but it turns out to have long-range implications and deadly effects. And frankly, this is one of the things that I'm really worried about, the research on the UARC, is I asked President McLean, what are these task orders that they're going to be doing? And he either didn't know or wouldn't say, but he said, I don't know.
And who's going to monitor them, and
who's
going to say which one to be taken and which one not to be taken? Are we going to trust it to an elite group of 3-4 people or however many to decide on that? Yeah. So that's an interesting thing.
And yes.
So we answered Alva's questions.
What was the other part of it?
There was another question about whether, I think it was whether or not there were UARCs at the military-run universities.
Oh, not military-run universities, but other, regular universities, public or private universities. Yeah.
Yes, there are only at 4 other universities.
Yeah.
John
4.
Hopkins.
This would have been. This would be. I was gonna say would have been the 5th, but McLean has recommended it. But we still have to fight against it. Yeah.
The important thing is that they're very self-contained.
Right.
Off campuses. They're like the one at John Hopkins is as big as the whole UH campus here on Mānoa, and so they're not integrated into the whole fabric of the academic environment.
Right.
Whereas at the University of Hawaii.
Yeah, at Manoa, no matter if it's a system or Manoa,
yeah,
it's going to be
the same thing. I mean,
it's the same thing down here at the working level.
In fact, the original documents relating to UARC all specified that it would be that UARC would flow throughout the existing military installations, the existing university facilities, and that it would always be a system type of project, even if it were to be based within the UH Mānoa administration.
Yeah, on the question of militarization, I interviewed Kyle Kajihiro was on the previous show, and I want to just play a short segment of it because, you know, Kyle Kajihiro is from American Friends Service Committee Hawaii, and he's very active in the community, and he has a good thing to say about the UARC situation and what his concerns were.
Immediately, it was following the trend of militarization that was happening in Hawaii, you know, around the world really. The United States is expanding its military bases, but here was a institution that, you know, stands for free inquiry, liberal thinking, you know, and freedom of speech, and now this UARC seems to be an encroachment, an attempt to institutionalize and to basically grab a piece of the university to serve the purposes of warfare, of making better weapons, and that seems completely contradictory to the mission of a public university, especially the University of Hawaii, whose motto is, above all nations is humanity. So that's why, you know, we got involved in this effort to try to protect the university and stop the UARC, along with other, actually Native Hawaiian groups were the ones who sounded the alarm, first of all.
Yeah. Before we go to the other guests, I would like to... Okay, so here, I mean, you know, he's like a voice from the community, and he's very well respected in the community, and he does a lot of good work. And that is the sentiments, you know, in the grassroots community. So I just wanted to play that to give another perspective, that it's not only the university community that's against it, you know, as you mentioned earlier, but, you know, people in the community also are against it. And also in terms of the points that we brought up in terms of is it good for economic development and so on, all these things have to be taken into account as well. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things I just want to add, what Kyle said is, it's not just the task orders for the science areas, mostly in the College of Engineering and maybe HIG, but the UARC ultimately, and there's been stated that the idea is that it will expand to anthropology, to sociology, to communications. So this is really an octopus with tentacles that wants to just seep into really the very marrow of the university.
Yeah.
It's not going to stop just with the areas of excellence,
yeah,
so-called excellence.
Right. Excellence, yeah. And as they say, excellent. Excellent point. But anyway, so I think, you know, this whole thing would have one ask the question, what's next? I mean, how do you oppose it now? Whom do you target? I mean, we've been talking about McLean, we've been talking about the Board of Regents, but what can be done, you know? So I just want to show something on the Elmo to start the discussion on what can be done. Take back Bakmanho rally to save UH and so on. So Ikaika, you were active in those kinds of issues. Would you want to?
Sure, just briefly. We're having a rally tomorrow, Wednesday, that's March 15th, from 11:30 a.m. to 1 o'clock p.m. at Bachman Hall. And it's to bring people together to talk about the need for the administration to listen and actually respect the voices of the students, the voices of the faculty. There's a whole bunch of things going on right now. UARC, the way in which the faculty and the students have been ignored on UARC is just the most egregious example. But there's a whole series of concerns, particularly coming out of the student body, relating to the dorms, relating to the tuition increase, which is a substantial increase in a time when housing is going up, when the cost of living is going up in Hawaii. Most students are working, you know, at least one job, if not two, just to get by and to pay the tuition. there's concerns about the patenting of kalo, and there was a very wonderful rally that was held just a couple of weeks ago at Bachman Hall. All of these things are concerns coming from the student body, and they echo, I think, also the need for the faculty to be listened to. So I asked this question when I talk to classes. If Mr. McLean is making a salary of $369,000, you can do the math. Over 365 days in a year, that amounts to more than $1,000 a day. A person making that much money should at least be listening to the constituency, should at least be listening to the faculty, should at least be listening to the students.
That's true.
And the community who's paying his salary.
Yeah,
that's right.
That's right.
To just follow up on what he said, that the student paper had quite a strong editorial against the UARC based on the fact that we have so many other problems on this system and in certainly this campus that need attention before the huge management burden that the UARC will bring to the campus.
So what can, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, and I was just going to say management, I'm not the one who knows all the detail, but Kyle Kajihiro has been trying to find out about RCUH and a criminal case of investigation that's been launched against the university and RCUH and hasn't made any headway whatsoever. The point is that who really will monitor this and control not only the monies, but then, as you say, the task orders, what will be environmentally dangerous or not dangerous. So these are important things to consider.
That's right. The university has been very reluctant to release information, even when official requests are submitted to the university under the Uniform Information Practices Act and the Freedom of Information Act. The university is stonewalling the public.
So we're trying to go and preach democracy in Iraq, and we don't have democracy here at the UH. I mean, this is really really ridiculous, it seems to me, and really disconcerting, disheartening. And but we have to keep the fight against UARC, to be sure, and all those other travesties of democracy and justice. So leads me to this question. I mean, what can be done, because now it's the Board of Regents who's going to be making the official decision. So what can be done to counter that?
I think that it's important that the students and the faculty make it known, make it very clear and audible that we're not satisfied with the direction the university is going. We call for people to come out tomorrow to the rally from 11:30 to 1. And I think also we need to call on the Board of Regents, even if they are political appointees, that they need to act out of conscience.
Yeah, and we're going to appeal to their humanity and their conscience as well, and their sensitivities and respect for the community and so on, and not serve only the business community, the big business community, but or any kind of business community, but also the community at large. And so we still have a lot of work to be done, and we should keep the pressure on the administration, U.S. administration, but also on the Board of Regents, and have coalitions and alliances beyond the university in a bigger way than has already been done.
If people want to get information, they should go to our website. It's stopuarc.info.
Stopuarc.info. Okay, so that's a good way of doing it. Sorry, we didn't get to the other thing, but it's okay. So anyway, we're about we're about out of time. So any final comments, quick comments before we go?
Just that we really need to take back our university, and that we can do it. We've forestalled for a long time, raised issues about UARC, and we can continue, and we must continue to do it, because this is our university.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for coming, and thanks for our viewers, and we'll see you next month. We'll have another show next month about other things Hawaiian as well. Okay, thank you very much.